I still remember the first time everything fell apart. It wasn't a loud bang or a shocking moment. No, it was quieter than that. It was in the dead of night, when the world outside my window was calm, and I was just trying to get a little rest before another long day of work. But everything shifted the moment I heard the knock on my door. I got up, still groggy, not expecting much. The clock on the wall blinked 1 a.m., the kind of hour that makes everything feel too surreal, like the world is in a fog and nothing really matters anymore. But then, the knock came again, sharp and urgent. Who could be knocking at this hour? I thought, my heart rate picking up. My instincts kicked in. I was a cop, and this was what we trained for. I walked to the door, grabbing the heavy chair from the corner. Not from fear, but from the unsettling feeling that something was about to happen that would change everything. I opened the door, and there she was, Sarah, my daughter, collapsed into my arms, sobbing like the world was ending. "Mom, he hit me. Because of her," she gasped between sobs. I didn't know what to say at first. I just held her, feeling her trembling body in my arms. The shock, the rage, the heartbreak, it all swirled in my chest, but for that moment, all that mattered was getting her inside, making sure she was safe. I didn't ask her more questions, not yet. I knew we had to get her settled first, so I pulled her inside, carefully sitting her on the couch. Her lip was split, blood dried along the edges, and her left eye, it was barely open, purple, swollen. I couldn't even process what I was seeing. This wasn't just a fight. This was more than just a moment of anger. This was violence. "My God, Sarah, who did this to you?" "Was it Robert?" I asked, my voice trembling. She didn't answer at first. She just cried, her sobs tearing through the silence in the house. It was a cry I had never wanted to hear. Not for her, not for my child, not from the man I once trusted. I ran to get the first aid kit from the kitchen, my hands shaking as I pulled out the supplies, but nothing could stop the anger boiling inside me. No amount of bandages or ice packs would fix this. The damage was done. While we waited for the taxi to take Sarah to the emergency room, my mind raced. I couldn't get my hands to stop shaking. This was my daughter, the child I'd raised with love, the child who had always been strong, independent. And now, here she was, broken by the man she had trusted with her life. We got to the hospital, and the moment we entered the emergency room, Dr. Figueroa was already waiting. She took one look at Sarah, and her face said everything I needed to know. This was bad. "We'll get her checked right away," Dr. Figueroa said, her voice calm but stern. I barely heard her words as the nurse took Sarah into the exam room. My world felt like it was spinning out of control. My daughter was hurt, and all I wanted was to hold her, protect her, and make everything go away. I sat in the waiting room, my mind racing through the worst-case scenarios. Was she going to be okay? Would this leave permanent scars on her? The doctors were checking her for internal injuries, but the more I thought about what had happened, the more my blood boiled. I pulled my phone out and dialed a number I knew by heart. James Ellison, the family lawyer. He answered groggily, still half asleep. I didn't waste any time. "James, start the plan now," I said firmly. He was quiet for a moment, probably waking up. Then he replied in a calm but serious tone. "Elizabeth, are you sure? This isn't something to take lightly." "I'm sure. Get ready, I'm coming for him," I said, my voice cold. This wasn't just about protecting my daughter anymore. This was about making sure Robert faced the consequences of what he had done. I hung up and sat back, feeling a strange calm wash over me. I wasn't going to let Sarah suffer in silence. I wasn't going to stand by while the man I thought was family got away with this. When Sarah came out of the exam room, I saw the look on her face. Exhausted, pale, but somehow relieved that she was finally being taken seriously. They had told us that her injuries, while painful, were not life-threatening. There were no broken ribs, no internal bleeding, but the emotional wounds, the scars that ran deeper than skin, they would take longer to heal. And that's when I made up my mind. I was done being silent. We weren't going to let Robert get away with this. Not now. Not ever. We were going to fight, and we were going to win. But first I needed to make sure Sarah felt safe, that she knew we would handle this together. "Sarah," I whispered, taking her hand as we sat in the sterile waiting room. "We're going to make sure he never does this again. You're safe now. I promise." She nodded, tears still glistening in her eyes, but a small sense of hope beginning to spark in them. The days following Sarah's visit to the emergency room were a blur. Every day felt like a heavy weight pressing down on my chest. There was so much to process, and yet I knew I couldn't afford to falter. Sarah needed me more than ever, and I wasn't about to let her down. We spent the next few days together, in and out of doctor's appointments and legal consultations. Every time we talked about what had happened, Sarah's voice would break, and I could see her trying to hold it together, but the cracks were showing. She had always been strong, but the fear and confusion were written all over her face. I knew she was carrying so much, and I was determined to help her bear that load. I spent sleepless nights researching the best lawyers, getting advice, and preparing for the inevitable battle. The first thing I did after the emergency room was call James Ellison, the family lawyer who had always been there when we needed help. He was a calm and steady presence in the chaos, but even I could tell this situation was different. This time, it was personal. "Elizabeth, we've got to move fast. This won't be easy. He's not just going to walk away from this," James told me one morning as we went over the details. His tone was serious, his words heavy with the weight of what was ahead. "But we have the evidence, and that's where we'll start." I couldn't sleep that night. I kept replaying the images of Sarah's bruises, her broken face, the video footage from Miss Camilla's camera, everything that had led us here. I had been a cop for most of my life, but this was different. This wasn't a case of just enforcing the law. This was my child. This was personal. I spent hours reviewing the photos, the medical records, the video. Every piece of evidence felt like another weapon in the fight to make Robert pay. But I also knew it wasn't just about putting him behind bars. It was about making sure Sarah never had to live in fear again. By the time I called James again, I was ready. "We've got everything we need to start this. Let's go after him," I said, determination in my voice. The first step in our legal fight was to gather everything we could. We needed statements, documentation, and witnesses. Sarah's friends, her co-workers, anyone who had seen the aftermath of Robert's actions, everyone who could help build our case. But the real battle began the moment I confronted Robert. I couldn't wait any longer. The longer I stayed silent, the more it felt like I was letting him win. It was time for him to know that his actions had consequences. It was a late afternoon when I finally decided to pay him a visit. I had no plan other than to get the truth out of him and to make sure he knew that we were not backing down. I walked up to his pawn shop, the place where he had always felt untouchable. The sign on the door creaked as I pushed it open, and I could feel the eyes of his workers on me as I entered. Robert was sitting behind the counter, counting money like nothing had changed. He looked up, a smirk playing on his lips when he saw me standing there. Well, if it isn't the police officer, now turned victim," he sneered, standing up and walking toward me. "What can I do for you, Elizabeth? You miss me already?" I didn't flinch. I didn't show any emotion. I was here for something much bigger than whatever insult he could throw at me. I pulled out the folder of evidence I had prepared. "You have no idea what's coming for you, Robert," I said, my voice steady, though my blood was boiling. "This is just the beginning. You think you can get away with what you've done? No, not anymore. I'm taking you down." He laughed, but it was hollow. "You think I'm afraid of you? You think these little papers are going to change anything? You don't have what it takes to take me down, Elizabeth. I didn't respond to his taunts. Instead, I slid the evidence in front of him. The photos of Sarah's injuries, the medical reports, the video footage, the forged land transfer papers, all of it. His eyes flickered for just a second, and I knew then that I had struck a nerve. The next few days felt like a slow burn. Robert's arrogance had faltered for a moment, but I knew he wasn't going down without a fight. We met with James again, and he gave us the hard truth. Robert's going to fight back. You have to be prepared for everything. Threats, lies, intimidation. But we've got the evidence. We're not backing down. And he was right. The moment Robert realized we had enough to go after him, he made his move. It started with phone calls, threatening messages, and attempts to get Sarah to recant her statements. He tried to pressure people into backing his side, but we had already anticipated that. When Sarah's phone rang with another threat from Robert, I saw the fear flash across her face. She quickly hung up, but I could tell she was rattled. "Mom, I'm scared. He said he'll ruin everything if I don't stop this," she confessed, her voice trembling. I put my hand on hers. "Sarah, we've come too far to back down now. We're not going to let him intimidate us. You're not alone in this. You have me, and you have the law on your side." And I meant it. Robert could try all he wanted to scare us, but we weren't going to let him win. As we prepared for the next phase of our legal battle, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. The next steps would be even harder. The courtroom, the witnesses, the pressure. But we were ready. We had come this far, and there was no turning back now. "I'm not afraid of him anymore, Mom," Sarah said one night after a long conversation. "I don't care what he does. He can't take away my future." I smiled, proud of how far she had come. "That's right, Sarah. No one can take away your future. It's yours to build." And so, with that resolve, we set our sights on the trial ahead. Whatever came next, we would face it together. The days leading up to the trial felt like a whirlwind of emotion, paperwork, and preparation. The weight of it all was heavy on my shoulders, but I knew I couldn't back down. This wasn't just about seeking justice for Sarah anymore. This was about reclaiming our lives, about showing the world that we would not be silenced. The legal team, headed by James, worked tirelessly, ensuring that every piece of evidence was in place. We had photos, medical reports, video footage from Miss Camilla's camera, and the forged land documents. Everything was lined up, and the case against Robert was growing stronger by the day. But even as we prepared for the trial, I couldn't help but feel a knot in my stomach. It wasn't the legal battle that scared me. It was the toll this fight was taking on Sarah. Every time I looked at her, I saw the shadows of her past, the bruises, the fear, the pain that was still there, even if it wasn't as visible anymore. It was late one evening, just days before the trial, when Sarah came to me, her face filled with uncertainty. "Mom, what if we lose? What if everything we've worked for doesn't matter?" she asked, her voice small, vulnerable. I could see the fear in her eyes, and for a moment, I saw the little girl who had once looked to me for protection. It was hard to see her so unsure, so uncertain about everything we were fighting for. "Sarah," I said softly, pulling her into a hug. "We're not in this for the win alone. We're here because we're doing what's right. We may not know what the future holds, but we've already done what we could. And no matter what happens, we will walk out of this stronger." She nodded, wiping away a tear. I could see the battle raging inside her, but I also saw the courage that had emerged since that night she'd come to me, broken and bruised. "We've come this far," I continued, "and no matter what happens, we have each other." That night, we talked for hours, about Robert, about everything, and for the first time in a long while, I saw Sarah find a piece of peace amidst the storm. The night before the trial, as we sat quietly in the living room, the phone rang. It was late, and we weren't expecting any calls. I glanced at the caller ID. It was an unknown number. I hesitated, but answered anyway. Elizabeth, it's James, the voice on the other end said urgently. I need you to listen carefully. We've just received some new information. Robert has hired a lawyer from out of town. This guy's ruthless. He's going to try and discredit everything we have. Be prepared. I felt my heart drop. What's he going to do? I asked, my voice tight. He's going to try and paint Sarah as unreliable, as unstable. He's going to attack her character, James said, his voice grim. But we've got the truth on our side. Just be ready. This won't be easy. I felt a rush of anger surge through me. I knew this would be a hard fight, but I hadn't anticipated it getting this dirty. Still, I couldn't back down. Not now. Not when we were so close. We'll be ready, I replied, my voice firm. We've been through worse, and we're not giving up now. The morning of the trial arrived, and I could feel the tension in the air. Sarah and I both dressed in silence, each of us lost in our thoughts, bracing ourselves for what was to come. I could see the apprehension in Sarah's eyes, but she was still standing tall. She wasn't backing down. As we arrived at the courthouse, I noticed the people gathered outside, the press, onlookers, and members of the community who had heard the rumors. Some of them glanced at us with sympathy, others with judgment. It was clear that not everyone was on our side. The courtroom itself felt cold and impersonal. The walls, the benches, the judges, it all felt too clinical, too detached from the personal pain Sarah and I had endured. As we entered, I could see Robert sitting in the front row, flanked by his lawyer, looking smug and confident. But beneath that arrogance, I knew he was afraid of the truth coming to light. The trial was everything I feared it would be, tense, exhausting, and emotionally draining. Robert's lawyer attacked Sarah relentlessly, trying to make her seem unreliable, desperate for attention. I could feel the weight of every accusation as if they were being hurled at me. But through it all, Sarah held her ground. When it was her turn to testify, I could see the anxiety on her face. But she stepped forward, her voice shaking at first, then growing stronger with each word. She told her story, the truth. She didn't back down, even when Robert's lawyer tried to twist her words. She faced her demons head on, and in that moment, I was prouder of her than I had ever been. As the day wore on, I could see Robert's defense crumbling. Every lie, every manipulation, every attempt to discredit us was being exposed for what it was, a desperate attempt to escape the consequences of his actions. The trial lasted for days, and by the end of it, the judge had heard everything. The evidence was clear, the testimony compelling. Robert had nowhere left to hide. The moment the judge gave his verdict, I felt my heart race. Elizabeth Arriaga, Sarah Arriaga. The court finds the defendant, Robert Mendes, guilty of domestic abuse, fraud, and emotional distress. The judge said, his voice clear and steady. This court will issue a protection order for Sarah and ensure that the fraudulent land transfer is nullified. All assets of the defendant are frozen until further notice. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. It was over. Robert's reign of terror was finished. And while justice had been served, the battle had taken its toll. But in that moment, I could breathe again. We had won. The days following the trial felt surreal. The weight that had hung over us for so long, the fear, the uncertainty, the constant anxiety, finally seemed to lift. For the first time in months, I allowed myself to breathe, to exhale the tension I'd been carrying for so long. But with that sense of relief came something else, something unexpected. I looked at Sarah one morning as we were having breakfast. The look in her eyes had changed. It was no longer the haunted look of a woman running from her past, but one that seemed to hold a quiet sense of peace. She was sitting there, calmly sipping her coffee, her fingers tracing the rim of her mug. "Mom, I've been thinking," she began, her voice low but steady, "about everything. The trial, what we've been through, and I think I need to do something more. I need to give back." I raised an eyebrow, surprised. "What do you mean?" Sarah set her mug down, looking at me with a new sense of determination. I want to help other women who've been through what I've been through. I want to work with organizations that support victims of domestic violence. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. On one hand, I was incredibly proud of her. This was Sarah's way of taking control of her life and turning her pain into something meaningful. But on the other hand, I was terrified. My daughter, who had barely survived the trauma of the last few months, was now ready to dive back into the very thing that had caused her so much pain. I didn't know if I could watch her walk down that path, but I also knew that I couldn't hold her back. She had fought so hard to reclaim her life, and now she wanted to help others do the same. In that moment, I realized that the strength I saw in her wasn't just for surviving the past. It was for shaping her future. I think it's a wonderful idea, I said, my voice soft but filled with pride. But you don't have to rush into it, Sarah. Take your time. This is your journey, and I'll be right here with you. In the weeks that followed, Sarah and I both began to heal. Slowly but surely, we put the pieces of our lives back together. Sarah dove into her new mission, reaching out to local organizations that helped women escape domestic abuse. She became an advocate, speaking at events, sharing her story, and helping others who were still trapped in the cycle of violence. It wasn't easy. There were times when the memories of her abuse would resurface, and she would have to take a step back. But every time she faced those demons, she came out stronger. It wasn't about forgetting. It was about taking control of her own narrative and using it to empower others. For me, the healing process was quieter, more internal. I focused on rebuilding the connections I had with my friends, my family, and my community. I took up hobbies I had neglected for years, like painting and gardening. Little by little, I started to feel like myself again. It wasn't perfect. Nothing ever is. But we were moving forward step by step, and that was enough. One day, as Sarah and I sat on the porch watching the sunset, she turned to me with a thoughtful expression on her face. "You know, I never thought I'd be here," she said, her voice soft, almost like she was speaking to herself. "I never thought I'd be able to move on from everything that happened, but now I think I'm ready to truly live again, to not just survive, but to thrive." I smiled, my heart swelling with pride and relief. "You're stronger than you think, Sarah. You've always been stronger than you realized." She laughed quietly, looking out at the horizon. "I guess we both are." We sat there in silence for a while, just taking in the peacefulness of the moment. It felt like everything had come full circle. The struggle, the pain, the fight for justice. And now we had a chance to start fresh. In the months that followed, Sarah continued her advocacy work, and I focused on finding joy in the everyday. But there was a subtle shift in the air. Sarah had become a voice for others, someone people could look up to, and I couldn't be prouder. One day, Sarah called me up excitedly. "Mom, you won't believe it. I've been invited to speak at a national conference for domestic violence awareness. This is huge." I could hear the excitement in her voice, and I couldn't help but smile. "That's amazing, Sarah. You've worked so hard for this. I'm so proud of you." She paused for a moment, then added, "Mom, this is just the beginning. I want to keep going. I want to build something bigger, something that can reach more people. I want to change lives." I knew then that Sarah was ready to take her story, her pain, and turn it into something that could help others. And I was ready too. Ready to support her, to stand by her, and to continue building a life that was no longer defined by what had been taken from us, but by what we had fought for and what we had built together. After everything we'd been through, Sarah and I had learned to take each day as it came. The road to healing was still ongoing, but it was no longer something we feared. We had learned that it wasn't the bad days that defined us, but the way we moved through them, together. The first sign of true peace came one Saturday morning. Sarah had been invited to speak at a national conference on domestic violence. I had watched her over the past few months, speaking at smaller events, sharing her story, and supporting other survivors. But this conference? This was different. This was the big stage. "I'm so nervous, Mom," Sarah admitted as we got ready to leave for the event. "This is a big opportunity, and I want to make a difference. But what if I mess up?" I looked at her, taking a deep breath. This was her moment. I knew how much it meant to her. "You don't have to be perfect, Sarah. You just have to be you. The story you tell matters, and the fact that you're willing to share it, that's powerful." Her eyes softened, and for a moment, I saw the little girl who had looked to me for reassurance all those years ago. Now, she was a woman who was ready to face the world and make it better, one step at a time. "I'm proud of you," I added quietly. "No matter what happens today, you've already made a difference." As we walked into the grand hall, I could feel the energy in the air. The room was filled with survivors, advocates, and people who had dedicated their lives to ending domestic violence. Sarah stood tall, taking in the crowd before stepping up to the stage. The lights were bright, the faces in the audience were expectant, and there was a hushed silence as she began to speak. She spoke with a calm confidence, sharing her journey and the battles she had fought. She didn't sugarcoat anything. She told her truth, and as she did, I saw something in her I had never seen before, the strength of someone who had not just survived, but thrived. When she finished, the room erupted into applause. The standing ovation felt like a culmination of everything we had been through. The trial, the pain, the heartache. All of it was worth it. Sarah had found her voice, and with it, she was giving hope to others. Later that evening, we sat in the quiet of our living room, reflecting on the day. I couldn't help but smile. This was the Sarah I had hoped for, the woman who had faced her worst fears and came out the other side stronger than she had ever been. "Mom, I feel free," she said softly, her voice almost in awe. "I feel like I'm finally living the life I was supposed to live, not just surviving, but actually living." I reached over and squeezed her hand. "You've earned that freedom, Sarah. You've earned it with every step you've taken." And as I looked at my daughter, I realized that we had both come so far. It wasn't just Sarah who had been through a transformation. I had too. The woman sitting next to her now wasn't the same person who had first walked into that courtroom fighting for justice. I had healed too. Slowly but surely, I had started to reclaim the pieces of myself that had been lost along the way. And together, we had built something new. Just a week later, I received a phone call I hadn't anticipated. It was from the same lawyer who had represented us during the trial, James Ellison. "Elizabeth, I have an opportunity for you. A local nonprofit is looking to hire someone with your background in law enforcement and victim support. They're starting a new program, and I immediately thought of you." I felt my heart race. The idea of working with an organization that helped people like us, people who had experienced trauma, who were looking to rebuild, was something I had never imagined for myself. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that this could be the next step. I had spent so much of my life supporting others in my own way, and now I had a chance to do it on a larger scale. "I don't know if I'm ready for this, James," I admitted, my voice filled with uncertainty. "It's been a long road, and I'm not sure I want to go back to that world." But James's voice was steady. "You don't have to go back to the world you knew, Elizabeth. This is different. You've learned so much from your own experiences. You could help change lives. You're ready." A few weeks later, I found myself walking into a bright, open office with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in years. The nonprofit was a small but dedicated team, focused on helping victims of domestic abuse rebuild their lives. It wasn't about punishing perpetrators anymore. It was about healing, offering a path forward, and empowering people to take control of their futures. The first few days were overwhelming. There was so much to learn, so many people to meet. And yet, as I walked through the doors each morning, I felt a sense of fulfillment that I had never experienced before. It felt like I was finally doing the work I was meant to do. As the months passed, Sarah continued her advocacy work, and I found my place within the nonprofit. Our lives had found new rhythms. We were still healing, still moving forward, but we were no longer carrying the weight of our pasts alone. We had each other, and that was more than enough. One night, after another long day of work, Sarah and I sat together on the porch, watching the sunset. "You know, Mom, this feels like the life we were meant to have. We fought so hard for it, and now it's ours." I smiled, looking at my daughter, and realized how true those words were. We had fought for everything we had, and now we were living it. "I agree, Sarah. We've come a long way, and we're just getting started." The months had gone by faster than I expected. The work I was doing at the nonprofit gave me a sense of purpose I hadn't realized I'd been missing. I had found my place in the world again. But what surprised me the most was how much I had changed. For the first time in years, I was living for myself. Not just for Sarah, not just for others, but for me. Sarah, too, was thriving in her own way. Her work in advocacy had taken off, and she was receiving recognition for the changes she was making in her community. I could see the pride in her eyes every time she spoke about her work. She had truly found her calling, and it was a joy to watch her flourish. But despite all the progress, there was still one thing we hadn't fully addressed: the future. What would we do with this newfound freedom? How would we continue to build the lives we wanted? It started with a phone call, of course. I was sitting at my desk one afternoon, sorting through emails and preparing for a new case when the phone rang. It was James again. He always had a way of making things happen, even when I didn't expect them. "Elizabeth, I have an opportunity that I think could be a good fit for you. A well-known advocacy group has taken notice of the work you've been doing. They want to offer you a position, head of outreach and community programs," he said, his voice serious but filled with excitement. I felt my heart skip a beat. "What? Why me? I mean, I'm still relatively new to all this." "You're not new, Elizabeth. You've lived through the very thing they're fighting against. You have the heart, the experience, and the passion to lead," James replied confidently. "This could be the next step in your journey." I sat there for a moment, absorbing his words. This was big, bigger than anything I'd ever imagined. I'd been so focused on the daily grind of healing and moving forward that I hadn't considered what might come next. But now, here it was, an opportunity to make a larger impact. After talking it over with Sarah, I knew what I had to do. I couldn't pass up the chance to effect real change on a larger scale. I accepted the position. The first few weeks were overwhelming. The new role came with its challenges. There were more people to meet, more strategies to develop, and a lot more responsibility. But for the first time in a long while, I felt like I was exactly where I needed to be. I wasn't just working for a paycheck anymore. I was working for something bigger, something that would help people like us. At home, Sarah and I continued to support each other, celebrating the small victories, the moments of joy in between all the hard work. Her journey as an advocate was beginning to branch out into public speaking and outreach, while I focused on making lasting change through the non-profit. Our paths were different, but we were both focused on creating something better, not just for ourselves, but for others. One evening, after a particularly busy day, I found myself sitting with Sarah, just the two of us, talking about the future. There was something about these quiet moments that reminded me how far we had come. I looked at her, my heart full. "You know, Sarah," I began, my voice soft. "I never imagined we'd be here. After everything we went through, I thought we'd just survive. But now, I see it. We've actually built something better. We've created new lives for ourselves. Sarah smiled, her eyes shining with understanding. I don't think we're just surviving anymore, Mom. We're living. We're thriving. I didn't know what it would look like, but this feels right. And I'm proud of you, of us. Her words struck me deeply. She was right. We had survived. And now we were living in a way that I never could have imagined back when everything felt so hopeless. We had found strength, not just in surviving the past, but in moving forward, embracing the future. The next few months brought more changes, more challenges, but also more growth. We had both found our places in the world, but we knew that this journey was far from over. The work we were doing was important, but it was also hard, and there were moments when we both struggled. We had to confront our own demons, face the pain we hadn't fully processed, and deal with the parts of ourselves we still hadn't healed. But every day, we took steps forward. Every day, we grew stronger. Every day, we learned to face the future with hope instead of fear. One afternoon, as I sat at my desk reviewing some community outreach plans, I received an email from a survivor who had attended one of the events Sarah had spoken at. The message was simple, but it hit me like a ton of bricks. Thank you for sharing your story. It gave me the courage to leave my abuser. I didn't think I could make it, but now I see there's hope. I just wanted to thank you for saving my life. Reading those words, I realized that this was why we had done it. This was why we had fought. Because there were people out there like her who needed to hear our story, who needed to see that there was life after trauma. The days had begun to blur together. Between my new role, Sarah's expanding advocacy work, and the constant changes that came with our new lives, there was never a dull moment. But even as the pace picked up, there was a sense of peace. We were doing something important now, not just for ourselves, but for everyone who was still fighting the battles we had fought. It wasn't easy. There were moments when Sarah would break down, quietly at night when she thought I wasn't looking. I could see the weight of her past, the burden of her memories, and I knew the scars would never fully fade. But she had found a way to use that pain. She was telling her story, helping others break free, and through it all, she was healing. I watched her one night after she had returned from a particularly tough speech at a women's shelter. She looked exhausted, but there was a fire in her eyes I hadn't seen in years. She had become a true beacon of hope for so many women. "Mama, I feel like I'm finally making a difference," she said as we sat on the couch, both of us in silence for a moment. "I've helped so many women, and I've learned so much about myself. It feels like I'm finally where I belong." I squeezed her hand gently, a small smile on my lips. "You're changing lives, Sarah, and you've done more than that. You've shown everyone, especially me, that we can move past the hardest things in life and come out stronger." She gave me a tired smile. "I'm not done yet, Mom. I've still got so much more to do, and I want to keep fighting." The more Sarah poured herself into her work, the more I realized how much she had grown. She wasn't the frightened girl I had once comforted after the abuse. She had become a woman who was standing tall, making her own decisions, and changing the world around her. But it wasn't just her work that had changed. For the first time in years, I found myself considering my own future. I had always been the protector, the one who carried the weight of our lives, the one who held everything together. But as Sarah stepped into her role as an advocate, I began to realize that I could step into my own future too. I thought about the work I was doing with the nonprofit. I thought about how it made me feel, how I felt like I was finally making a real difference, not just in my own life, but in the lives of others. The more I worked with survivors of domestic violence, the more I understood just how deep the scars ran, how much healing was needed, and how much more there was to do. That evening, as I sat at my desk after a long day, I made a decision. "I want to take this to the next level," I said to myself aloud, as if hearing my own voice made the thought more concrete. I had spent so many years hiding behind the role of mother, wife, and protector, But now it was time for me to step forward as Elizabeth. Just Elizabeth. No more apologies, no more hesitation. I wanted to create change, to advocate, to heal. I wasn't just going to be the silent observer in Sarah's world anymore. I was going to find my voice again. Of course, it wasn't all smooth sailing. There were obstacles along the way. We had moments of doubt, moments of fear, and moments when it felt like the weight of everything, our past, the pressure, the expectations, was just too much. Sarah had her own struggles as she continued to advocate for others. She found herself overwhelmed by the stories she was hearing, the pain that still lived in the world. The cases were difficult to hear, and at times, it felt like there was no end to the suffering. "I don't know how to do this anymore, Mom," she said one evening, sitting in the dark, her face heavy with exhaustion. "The pain is so much. Sometimes I feel like I'm drowning in it." I reached over, pulling her into a tight embrace. "You don't have to carry it all, Sarah. It's not your job to fix the world on your own. You're doing incredible things, but you can't do everything at once. You've got to give yourself permission to breathe." Her shoulders shook as she cried quietly. "I just want to help. I just want to make everything better." And in that moment, I knew what she needed most. "Sarah, you are helping. You've already made such a difference, but you can't forget to take care of yourself too. It's okay to feel the weight of it, but don't let it crush you." That night marked a turning point for us both. We sat together, acknowledging the hard truths of the path we'd been on. We realized that while we couldn't undo the past, we could continue to build on the future, brick by brick. We had been through so much, and now it was time to find balance. For me, that balance meant diving even deeper into my work, stepping up in the community and finding a way to make the change I had always dreamed of. For Sarah, it meant stepping back when she needed to, being gentle with herself, and finding joy in the moments when she wasn't advocating, in the quiet times when she could just be. And so, we moved forward, together, as a team, as a family. It wasn't perfect. There were still bad days, still nights when the memories tried to creep in, but we learned how to navigate them. We had learned how to talk about the hard stuff, how to forgive, how to love, and how to protect our peace. The future was still unwritten, but for the first time in a long time, we were both eager to write it, together. As the months passed, our lives began to take shape in ways we hadn't anticipated. Sarah's work as an advocate for domestic violence survivors grew into something larger than either of us had imagined. She began traveling for conferences, sharing her story with people across the country, and inspiring others to take action in their own lives. And I had found my own rhythm, my own path, working with the nonprofit and finding ways to push my own limits. But with every step we took forward, there were moments where it felt like we were both living in the shadow of our past. Not in a bad way, but as a reminder of where we came from and how far we had come. One afternoon, as Sarah and I sat together in our living room, talking about the future, I couldn't help but notice how much had changed. The weight of everything that had happened had started to feel more like a story we had left behind, not a burden we carried with us every day. But we still had work to do. There were still people out there who needed our help. "I've been thinking a lot lately," Sarah began, breaking the silence, "about the women we've helped and about all the people still stuck in abusive relationships. I want to do more. I want to create a space, a sanctuary for them. Somewhere they can heal without the fear of being judged, without the stigma that comes with leaving an abusive partner." I looked at her, impressed, but also a little hesitant. "Sarah, that's a huge step. Are you sure you're ready for that kind of responsibility? It's a lot to take on." She smiled, a quiet confidence in her eyes. "I think I've been ready for a long time. I just didn't know what it would look like, but now, I know this is what I'm supposed to do. I want to build something lasting, a a place where people can find peace again. That conversation marked the beginning of something new for Sarah. She wasn't just an advocate anymore. She was becoming a leader in the fight for change. She started researching, reaching out to local organizations, and talking to others in the field. The idea of a sanctuary for survivors of abuse began to take shape. But I couldn't help but worry. I was proud of her, of course. But I also knew how draining this kind of work could be. She had been through so much already. Was she ready to take on such a massive responsibility? As I voiced my concerns to her, she listened patiently, her eyes steady. "I know it's a big risk, Mom," Sarah admitted, "but I'm not just doing this for me. I'm doing it for every woman who feels like they have no way out. We've been given a second chance. It's time to make sure others get that same opportunity." Her words struck me deeply. She wasn't just talking about the work. She was talking about her own healing. She had found purpose in helping others find their way, just as she had. And in that moment, I realized that we were both on the same journey, one of empowerment, growth, and healing. Sarah's vision for a sanctuary quickly became a reality, but it didn't come without its challenges. The process of finding the right space, securing the funding, and navigating the complexities of nonprofit work wasn't easy. We spent months working late into the night, creating fundraising campaigns, writing grants, and reaching out to our network for support. There were moments of doubt, moments when I wondered if we could pull it off, but every time Sarah encountered an obstacle, she pushed through with unwavering determination. The more we worked together, the more I realized that this wasn't just her project. It was our project. We were both committed to building a legacy, a safe space for survivors of abuse, and a testament to the strength of women everywhere. One evening, we held our first major fundraising event. The turnout exceeded our expectations, and the outpouring of support was overwhelming. As I stood in the crowd, watching Sarah speak to a group of supporters, I felt an overwhelming sense of pride. This was her moment. She had come so far from the woman who had been battered and broken. Now she was leading a movement. "We're building something bigger than ourselves," Sarah said to the crowd, her voice filled with passion. "This sanctuary will be a place of healing, hope, and transformation. It's not just about providing shelter, it's about giving people the tools they need to rebuild their lives." The road to opening the sanctuary was long and filled with setbacks, but with each obstacle, Sarah grew more resilient. We were both learning how to navigate the world of fundraising, marketing, and nonprofit management. And though the work was grueling, it was also incredibly rewarding. We were building something that would have a lasting impact on the community, something that would help those who needed it most. But as the days turned into weeks, I couldn't ignore the emotional toll this was taking on Sarah. She had poured everything into this project, and there were times when the pressure seemed too much. She would come home late, her face weary, her shoulders slumped. "Mom, I'm so tired," she confessed one night, sitting next to me on the couch. "I just feel like I'm carrying the weight of the world on my shoulders. Some days, it feels like I can't do it anymore." I didn't know what to say at first, but then I remembered the words I had said to her earlier, that we were in this together. "Sarah," I said softly, "you don't have to carry it alone. I'm here. We're here. This is your dream, but you don't have to carry the burden of it all by yourself. You've already done so much. Let us help you." As the sanctuary began to take shape, so did the challenges. The excitement of our fundraising success and the progress we were making was tempered by the reality of what we were undertaking. We weren't just building a physical space for survivors, we were building an entire community, an environment where people could heal, rebuild, and rediscover themselves. And that took more than just walls and a roof. It took patience, understanding, and unwavering dedication. But nothing could have prepared me for the toll it would take on Sarah. She had thrown herself into the work so completely that I could see the strain starting to show. Every meeting, Every phone call, every grant application seemed to be met with more obstacles than solutions. She was stretched thin, trying to balance everything: her role at the nonprofit, her advocacy work, and now the sanctuary. There were days when I could see the exhaustion in her eyes. She would come home after long hours, her shoulders slumped, her face drawn. It was hard to watch, especially knowing how much she had already been through. "Mom, I just don't know if I can keep going like this," she said one evening, sitting down beside me on the couch. "It feels like every time we take one step forward, something knocks us 2 steps back." I looked at her, my heart aching. She had done so much already, but I could see the pressure mounting. And the truth was, I didn't have all the answers. I didn't know how to take the weight off her shoulders, but I knew we had to figure it out together. "You've been pushing yourself so hard, Sarah," I said softly. "It's okay to take a step back. You don't have to do it all. Let's ask for help. You don't have to carry this alone." Her eyes filled with tears, and for a moment, I saw the vulnerability she had hidden for so long. But there was also a glimmer of something stronger, something that had always been there, buried beneath the pain. She took a deep breath, wiping her eyes. "I know, Mom. I know you're right, but I just want to make sure we get it right. I want to make sure it's perfect for the women who need it, for the people who are depending on us." I took her hand in mine, giving it a reassuring squeeze. "We're going to get it right, Sarah, but we don't have to do it all at once. Let's pace ourselves. The most important thing is that we're doing this together." As Sarah continued to juggle her responsibilities, I stepped up to support her in new ways. I reached out to local organizations, connected with other advocates, and began to build a network of people who could help us. The beauty of this work wasn't just in the sanctuary we were creating. It was in the community we were building around it. One afternoon, I met with a woman named Carla, who ran a local women's shelter. She had heard about our project and wanted to offer support. Over coffee, we discussed ways we could collaborate, share resources, and provide better services to those who were escaping abuse. Carla's words struck me deeply when she said, "We can't do this alone. The power of what we're doing is in the community. It's about lifting each other up." I shared Carla's thoughts with Sarah later that day. She was quiet for a long time before responding, her voice tinged with gratitude. "I think I've been so focused on getting everything perfect that I forgot about the people who are already here, the ones who want to help, the ones who care." She paused, the weight of the realization settling in. "I've been so caught up in the logistics of it all, but maybe what we really need is to build connections with people who can help carry the load." It was a small shift in perspective, but it was a significant one. We weren't just creating a physical space. We were building a network of support, a community that extended far beyond the 4 walls of the sanctuary, and that community would be the foundation of everything we hoped to create. A few weeks later, we received an unexpected visit. It was from the local news station, who had caught wind of the work we were doing. They wanted to do a feature on the sanctuary to highlight our efforts and raise awareness for the cause. I was surprised, but also thrilled. This could be the break we needed to bring more attention to our mission, to bring more people into our cause. The day the cameras arrived, the whole atmosphere shifted. It was a strange feeling, being in the spotlight after so many months of working in the shadows. Sarah and I both felt the pressure, but we knew it was a necessary step in bringing our vision to life. As we stood in front of the cameras, Sarah shared her story with the reporter, her voice calm and steady. She spoke about the sanctuary, the women we hoped to help, and the journey she'd been on. Her words were raw and real, and as she spoke, I saw the confidence I had been hoping to see in her all along. "I've been through a lot," she said, her eyes looking directly into the camera. "But I'm not defined by my past. I'm here because I believe in the power of community. I believe in the power of support. And I believe that no one should have to suffer in silence. As the interview wrapped up, I could see the spark in Sarah's eyes. This was the moment where everything came together. This was the moment we had worked so hard for. In the following weeks, the exposure helped us in ways we hadn't expected. We received donations, volunteers, and offers for help from people in the community who were touched by Sarah's story. The sanctuary began to take shape, not just as a physical space, but as a living, breathing part of the community. Every day, more people came to us, offering their time, resources, and support. They believed in what we were building, and that belief gave us the strength to push through when things got tough. We were no longer just two people struggling to survive. We were a team, a movement, and we had a purpose that was bigger than ourselves. As the weeks passed, the sanctuary began to take shape, brick by brick. The space we had envisioned for survivors was slowly becoming a reality. The walls were painted, the rooms were furnished, and little by little, it started to feel like a safe haven. A place where people could come and heal without fear of judgment. But the journey wasn't without its difficulties. We were still learning how to manage the day-to-day operations of the sanctuary while keeping up with the demands of our personal lives. Sarah was juggling her advocacy work, fundraising, and now overseeing the development of the sanctuary. I too found myself working late into the night, writing emails, making phone calls, coordinating volunteers, and ensuring that everything ran smoothly. There were moments when we felt overwhelmed. The weight of everything seemed to grow heavier, and I could see the exhaustion in Sarah's eyes. She would come home, her shoulders slumped, her face pale from lack of sleep. I knew she was pushing herself hard, harder than anyone should, but we kept moving forward. Every obstacle we faced only made us more determined, and with the continued support of the community, we were making real progress. It was a rainy afternoon when the first resident arrived at the sanctuary. Her name was Melissa, and she was just 25 years old. She had come from an abusive relationship, one that had drained her emotionally and physically. She had nowhere else to turn, and after hearing about the sanctuary through a local support group, she decided to take the leap and seek help. When she arrived at the sanctuary, her eyes were filled with fear, but also with hope. I could see the weight of everything she had been through in her posture, in the way she hesitated to even step through the door. But Sarah was there to greet her, as calm and reassuring as ever. "We're so glad you're here, Melissa," Sarah said, her voice gentle but firm. "You're safe now. This is your home, and we'll help you through this." I stood in the background, watching the exchange, my heart swelling with pride. We had created something real, something that could change lives. I didn't know exactly what the future held, but in that moment, I knew we were on the right path. Over the next few weeks, more women arrived, each with their own story, their own struggles. Sarah and I worked tirelessly to provide them with the support they needed. It wasn't just about giving them a place to stay. It was about giving them the tools to rebuild their lives, to regain their sense of worth, and to take control of their futures. But as we continued to work with these women, I began to see something I hadn't fully understood before: the true power of what we were doing. These women weren't just victims of their pasts. They were survivors. They had come from pain, from fear, from brokenness, but they were finding their way back to themselves, one step at a time. And that, I realized, was the true purpose of the sanctuary, not just to provide safety, but to empower these women to reclaim their lives, their voices, and their strength. However, it wasn't all smooth sailing. As we began to gain more attention, both from the public and the media, we started to face pushback from certain groups. There were people in the community who didn't understand what we were doing. There were whispers, doubts, and criticisms that began to surface. Some questioned whether it was truly possible to help these women. Others didn't believe that they should be given a second chance. One afternoon, we received a letter from a local group that opposed our sanctuary, claiming that we were enabling women to leave their families and disrupt the traditional family structure. The letter was filled with accusations and suggestions that we were doing more harm than good. It was harsh, hurtful, and felt like a punch to the gut. I showed Sarah the letter, and she looked at it for a long time without saying a word. I could see the hurt in her eyes, but I also saw something else, the same determination that had gotten us to this point. "We can't let them stop us, Mom," she said quietly, her voice steady. "This is bigger than them. We're doing what's right. We have to keep going." And that's exactly what we did. We didn't let the negativity deter us. Instead, we used it as fuel to keep pushing forward. We reached out to the community, spoke at local meetings, and explained the importance of what we were doing. We invited people to visit the sanctuary, to see the work we were doing firsthand, and to meet the women whose lives had already been changed. One evening, after a particularly challenging day, Sarah and I sat on the porch, watching the sunset. The air was crisp, and the sound of crickets filled the silence. It was one of those rare moments when everything felt peaceful. No deadlines, no meetings, no pressures from the outside world. Just us, taking a moment to reflect on how far we had come. "You know, Mom, when we started this, I had no idea how much it would change us," Sarah said, her voice soft, but filled with gratitude. "I thought I was doing this for others, but in a way, it's been a journey for me too. I've learned more about myself, about strength, about resilience, and I think we're building something that will last." I looked at her, a lump forming in my throat. I had watched her grow from a scared, broken woman into someone who had found her voice and her purpose. She had turned her pain into something powerful, something that was helping others, and now she was giving me the strength to keep going. "I'm so proud of you, Sarah," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "You've turned your story into something beautiful. You've given so many people hope, and we're just getting started." She smiled, her eyes filled with tears. "Together, we can do anything." As the sanctuary began to flourish, so did the challenges. Each new resident brought with it a fresh set of difficulties and triumphs. Some women were ready to embrace their healing, to rebuild their lives. Others were still trapped in the remnants of their past, unsure if they could truly escape the chains that bound them. But no matter how tough things got, Sarah and I stood firm. There were days when the weight of it all seemed unbearable, when the paperwork piled up, when the staff and volunteers seemed stretched thin, when I wondered if we had bitten off more than we could chew. But then there were moments, quiet moments, when a woman would walk through the door with a new sense of hope in her eyes, or when Sarah would share a story of someone who had turned their life around. Those moments made it all worth it. We had always known that this sanctuary would need the support of the community, but it had surpassed even our expectations. We had received donations from local businesses, volunteers who donated their time and skills, and even individuals who had been touched by Sarah's story and wanted to give back. One of the most surprising forms of support came from a local businesswoman named Linda, who had been a guest at one of the conferences Sarah had spoken at. After hearing Sarah's speech, Linda had reached out to offer her help. "I've been thinking about what you said," Linda had told Sarah over the phone. "I've been in a privileged position for most of my life, but I've never truly understood the struggles people face. You've opened my eyes, and I want to help." Linda didn't just offer financial support. She became an advocate for the sanctuary. She helped us secure a larger venue for our upcoming charity gala, and she even introduced us to influential people in the community who could help us further expand our resources. Her involvement made all the difference, but with all this growth came the inevitable obstacles. We were starting to see the pressure building again. The demand for our services was growing, and we didn't have enough resources to keep up. We didn't have enough space to accommodate everyone who needed help. The funding, while generous, was limited. and there was still so much more we wanted to do. One afternoon, as Sarah and I sat at the kitchen table with a stack of bills and grant applications, I could see the stress written all over her face. "We need more space, Mom. We need more resources," she said, her voice heavy with concern. "There are so many women out there who need us, and we're running out of options." I reached across the table, taking her hand in mine. "We'll figure it out, Sarah. We always do. It's just going to take some time. We'll keep pushing forward, keep working together. We've built this sanctuary from the ground up. We can do anything." And we would. I knew that if we kept working as a team, with the support of our community, we would find a way to expand, to meet the growing needs of the women who depended on us. Just as we were beginning to feel the weight of these challenges, a surprising offer came our way. A large donor, a philanthropist with a history of supporting women's rights and empowerment, reached out to us. She had heard about the sanctuary through the media and wanted to meet. We were skeptical at first. We had heard of other organizations being offered large sums of money with strings attached, and we weren't willing to compromise our mission for the sake of funding. But when the meeting came, we quickly realized that this wasn't the case with this donor. Her name was Eleanor, and she had spent her life working in advocacy and social justice. She had been following Sarah's work and was impressed by how far we had come in such a short amount of time. "I've seen a lot of organizations in my time," Eleanor told us, her voice calm and reassuring. "But what you're doing here, this is different. This is real change, and I want to be a part of it." She offered us a substantial grant, but more importantly, she offered something we had been missing: connections. She knew people who could help with the logistics, with scaling the sanctuary, and with securing long-term funding. "I believe in what you're doing," Eleanor said, "and I want to make sure it continues. I'll do everything I can to help." It was the turning point we had been waiting for. With her support, we could finally take the next step. We could expand the sanctuary, hire more staff, and continue our mission on a larger scale. The weeks that followed were filled with work. We met with architects, hired new staff, and began planning for the next phase of the sanctuary's growth. But amid the hustle and bustle, there was a moment of reflection, a quiet afternoon when Sarah and I sat on the porch, watching the sunset. "I can't believe how far we've come, Mom," Sarah said, her voice soft but filled with awe. "From that first day when we had nothing to now, we're about to change so many more lives." I looked at her, my heart swelling with pride. "We've come so far because of you, Sarah. Your strength, your determination. You've created something beautiful here, and we're just getting started." She smiled, but I could see the exhaustion in her eyes. She had been working tirelessly, pushing herself to the limit, and though I knew she was doing it for all the right reasons, I also knew she needed rest, just as much as I did. "You've made a difference in the world, Sarah," I added quietly, "but don't forget to take care of yourself too. You deserve that." She nodded, taking a deep breath. "I know, Mom. I'm learning, one step at a time." With Eleanor's support, the momentum of the sanctuary shifted into high gear. We were no longer just a small operation, struggling to keep up with demand. We were growing, expanding, and reaching a new phase of our mission. The sanctuary was no longer just a dream. It was a reality. But with growth came growing pains. Sarah and I both felt the strain of everything, even as we saw the sanctuary begin to take shape in ways we had never imagined. There were long meetings, endless paperwork, new responsibilities. Sometimes it felt like we were barely keeping up. There was also the pressure of scaling our work. We weren't just providing shelter anymore. We were providing a platform for women to rebuild their lives from the ground up. We needed to hire more staff, build more facilities, and extend our outreach. One late night, after another exhausting day of meetings, I sat down with Sarah in the office. The stress was starting to show. Her hair was slightly disheveled, and I could see the exhaustion in her eyes, but there was still a fire burning in her. "I'm proud of what we've done, but I don't know how much longer I can keep up with all of this," she admitted, running a hand through her hair. Every time I think we're getting a handle on things, something else pops up. More paperwork, more requests, more meetings. It's never ending. I knew exactly how she felt. There were days when I wondered if we had bitten off more than we could chew. But I also knew this was our chance. We had the support, we had the resources, and we had the strength to push through. You don't have to do it all, Sarah, I said gently, looking at her. We've come this far, and we'll keep going. But we need to find balance. We can't let this work consume us. We spent a long time that night talking about the future, about the pressure, and about how we could protect ourselves from burning out. For so long, we had focused on the needs of others, the women coming to us for help, the community that relied on us. But we realized we also needed to take care of ourselves. Maybe we need to take a step back, Sarah said quietly, looking out of the window at the stars. Maybe we need to slow down just a little. I nodded, my heart aching with the realization that we had been pushing ourselves too hard. We both needed time to breathe, time to remember why we were doing this in the first place. Not just for others, but for ourselves. That weekend, we made a decision. We would spend a few days away from the sanctuary. We would take a break from the work and focus on recharging, reconnecting, and reminding ourselves that the work we were doing was meaningful, but we couldn't sacrifice our own well-being in the process. We spent the weekend at a small cabin by the lake, nestled in the woods. It was quiet, peaceful, and exactly what we needed. No phones, no emails, no meetings, just the two of us, taking in the beauty of nature and finding time to reconnect with ourselves. The first day was difficult. The urge to check emails, the feeling of guilt for taking a break, it all weighed on us. But by the second day, we started to relax. We went on long walks by the water, talked about everything and nothing, and allowed ourselves to just be. For the first time in months, we weren't trying to fix everything. We were simply living in the moment. "This feels good," Sarah said, sitting next to me on the porch as the sun set over the lake. "I didn't realize how much I needed this." I smiled, squeezing her hand. We both did. Sometimes we need to remember to take care of ourselves before we can take care of anyone else. When we returned to the sanctuary, we were recharged. The weight of the world didn't feel as heavy anymore. We knew there was still work to be done. But we also knew that taking care of ourselves made us better equipped to take care of the sanctuary, its residents, and the community. It was around this time that we started to see the true impact of the sanctuary. The women who had come through our doors were changing. They weren't just survivors anymore. They were thriving. We were providing more than just shelter. We were giving them the tools to build their lives again, to regain their dignity, and to take control of their futures. One of our residents, Carla, had been with us for several months. She had come to us broken, battered, and unsure if she could ever move forward. But as the weeks passed, we saw her start to heal. She began to smile again. She started attending our workshops and speaking with the other residents. And one day, she came to Sarah and me with a decision she had made. "I've decided to go back to school," she said, her voice filled with determination. "I want to be a social worker. I want to help other women who've been through what I've been through." Sarah and I both smiled, our hearts swelling with pride. Carla had found her path, and she was no longer just a survivor. She was a fighter, a leader, and an example of what we were trying to create at the sanctuary. With the help of Eleanor's continued support, we were able to take our work to the next level. We expanded our outreach programs, increased the resources available to survivors, and made the sanctuary a place where women could find not just refuge, but hope. But we also continued to take care of ourselves. We learned that self-care wasn't a luxury, it was a necessity. We couldn't continue to pour from an empty cup. And as we sat down to plan for the future of the sanctuary, I realized just how far we had come. Sarah and I were no longer just two women trying to survive. We were building something real, something lasting. We had created a space where women could start over, and in doing so, We had started over ourselves. It had been a year since we first opened the doors of the sanctuary. A year since Sarah and I took that first step toward creating a safe place for women to heal, rebuild, and reclaim their lives. Looking back on everything we had accomplished, it felt almost surreal. There were times when we weren't sure we could do it. Times when the road seemed too long, the work too much, and the obstacles too great. But here we were, stronger than ever, and the sanctuary was thriving. We had helped so many women already, women who had come to us with nothing but brokenness and fear, and left with hope, purpose, and a future they had never thought possible. It wasn't always easy. There were setbacks. There were days when the pressure felt overwhelming, when we questioned if we could continue. But every time a woman walked through our door, ready to begin again, we knew we were on the right path. But even with all the progress, there were still challenges to face. The sanctuary was growing faster than we had anticipated. The need for our services was increasing, and with that came the responsibility of managing more residents, more volunteers, and more donations. It was exciting, but it was also a lot to handle. One evening, after a particularly hectic day of meetings and planning, I found myself sitting alone in my office. The silence was heavy, and I realized just how much responsibility I was carrying. It was a familiar feeling, the weight of wanting to do everything, to make everything perfect. But now, I had to learn to delegate, to trust others with the work that needed to be done. Sarah had been working tirelessly, and I knew she was feeling the same way. There was so much on our plates, and yet, we couldn't shake the feeling that we were only scratching the surface. How could we reach even more women? How could we ensure that the sanctuary didn't just survive, but flourished? As I sat there, lost in thought, Sarah came in. Her face was tired, but there was a quiet determination in her eyes. "I think we need to do more," she said, sitting down beside me. "I think we need to reach more women, not just those who can come to the sanctuary, but those who can't. We need to find a way to expand our outreach. We need to be there for them, even if they can't be here." Her words struck a chord. We had already made such a difference in the lives of the women who had come to us, but what about those who still felt trapped? The women who didn't have the means to escape, who didn't know where to turn. "You're right," I said, nodding. "We've done so much already, but there's so much more to do." Sarah's idea was one I had been contemplating for a while, but hadn't fully embraced until that moment. If we were going to truly make a difference, we needed to reach women outside the walls of the sanctuary. We needed to provide resources for those who were still trapped, still afraid, and still unsure of how to escape. And so, we began to plan. We worked with our team to create outreach programs, educational materials, and a mobile service that could bring support directly to women in need. We connected with local businesses, health professionals, and law enforcement to build a network of support. This wasn't just about providing shelter, it was about creating a community that could help women take the first steps toward freedom, no matter where they were. As we began to expand our services, we saw the ripple effect of the sanctuary's work. More women came forward. More stories of survival and healing emerged. And the most incredible part? Many of the women we had helped in the past were now returning to help others. They had found their own strength and were paying it forward, just as we had hoped. Carla, the woman who had first decided to go back to school to become a social worker, returned to us with a new sense of purpose. "I want to help others, just like you helped me," she said, her voice filled with passion. "I want to give back. I want to be the person who's there for someone else when they need it." And Carla wasn't the only one. We were starting to see a community form, a network of survivors who had come together to support one another. The women who had once walked through our doors, broken, were now walking through them as leaders, as advocates, as champions for change. They were reclaiming their voices, their lives, and their power. As I stood in the sanctuary one evening, Looking at the faces of the women who had found safety here, I realized that this was bigger than just us. It wasn't just about Sarah and me anymore. It was about a movement of women who had come together, who had turned their pain into power, and who were now helping to transform the lives of others. The sanctuary had become more than just a physical place. It had become a symbol of hope, of strength, and of resilience. It was a place where women could heal, but also a place where they could grow, thrive, and change the world. Sarah and I stood together in the quiet of the sanctuary one evening, looking out at the peaceful surroundings. "You know, Mom," she said softly, "when we first started this, I didn't know what to expect. I didn't know if we'd be able to help even one person, let alone create something like this." I smiled, looking at her with pride. "You've done more than you could ever imagine. You've created a legacy, and it's just the beginning." She smiled back, but there was a tear in her eye. "I think, in the end, this has been just as much about healing ourselves as it has been about helping others." I nodded, feeling the weight of her words. "You're right. We've healed through this, too. And now, we get to share that healing with the world." The sun was beginning to set on another busy day at the sanctuary, casting a warm golden light through the windows of the office. Sarah and I were sitting at the large table in the conference room, reviewing plans for the upcoming expansion. The building was buzzing with activity, staff members walking past with files in their hands, volunteers organizing events, and women participating in workshops in the next room. It was a busy, beautiful chaos, a sign that the sanctuary was growing, evolving, and making a real difference. Looking around, I couldn't help but feel a profound sense of pride. It hadn't been easy, but we had created something special here. We had taken a vision, one born from pain and struggle, and turned it into a place where women could find strength, support, and the resources they needed to rebuild their lives. Sarah looked at me, her eyes filled with gratitude. "I still can't believe it, Mom. We've come so far." I nodded, my heart swelling with emotion. "We really have, and we're just getting started." The sound of a door opening interrupted our conversation, and a woman I hadn't seen before stepped into the room. She was in her mid-30s, with a weary yet hopeful look in her eyes. Her clothes were simple, and she had the air of someone who had been through a lot but wasn't ready to give up. She introduced herself as Julia, and I could immediately tell she was seeking something, maybe answers, maybe just a chance. "I heard about your sanctuary from a friend," Julia said, her voice shaky but determined. "I'm here because I need help. I've been in an abusive relationship for years, and I don't know where else to turn." Sarah and I exchanged a glance. We had heard this story before, but every time someone new came through our doors, it was a reminder of why we did what we did. "Julia," I said gently, "you're in the right place. We're here for you, and you'll never have to go through this alone." Julia's arrival was a reminder that our work was never truly finished. Every new person who came through the door was a person in need of help, a person whose life could be transformed by the very sanctuary we had built. And as we grew, so did the need for our services, but that was something we had prepared for. Sarah and I had spent countless hours planning for this moment, when we would be able to reach even more people, when the sanctuary could extend its resources beyond our wildest dreams. The community was more involved than ever, and we had partnered with other organizations, local businesses, and social services to create an ecosystem of support. It wasn't about just providing shelter. It was about creating a comprehensive network that could support people from all walks of life. The sanctuary was now offering job training, financial literacy courses, therapy, legal services, and most importantly, a place where women could feel safe and valued. "We've come so far, but I want to keep pushing," Sarah said, her voice filled with quiet determination. "There are still so many people who need us." Her words resonated deeply within me. We had created something important, but There was always more to do. The work was ongoing, but I knew we were exactly where we needed to be. Later that evening, after the sanctuary had quieted down for the night, Sarah and I took a moment to reflect on everything we'd accomplished. The stars were visible through the large windows, and the world outside felt peaceful, serene. "Do you ever think about how much has changed, Mom?" Sarah asked, leaning back in her chair. "How different we are now from when we started." I took a deep breath, looking at her with pride. "All the time. I remember when you first came to me, broken and afraid, and now look at you. You're helping so many people, changing lives, giving them hope. And I'm not just talking about the women who come to the sanctuary. I'm talking about everyone whose life you've touched." Sarah smiled softly, her eyes brimming with gratitude. "I never thought I'd be the one doing this, Mom. I never thought I could turn my pain into something beautiful. But I've learned that the hardest things in life can teach us the most about who we really are." I reached over and squeezed her hand. "I've learned that too. And we're not done yet, Sarah. There's always more to do, more people to help, more lives to change." One afternoon, as we were wrapping up a meeting with a new partner organization, I received a call that would change everything. It was from a local law firm, one that had been following our progress. They were offering us a significant donation, but it came with a request. They wanted to partner with us on a national campaign to raise awareness about domestic violence and its impact on families. It was a huge opportunity, one that could amplify our message and expand the sanctuary's reach even further. I knew this would take things to another level. It would be the next step in building the sanctuary's legacy, not just in our town, but across the country. Sarah and I talked it over, and after some careful consideration, we decided to move forward with the campaign. But as we prepared to launch this new chapter, I realized that it wasn't just about growth. It was about ensuring that everything we had built would continue for generations to come. And that meant not just expanding the sanctuary, but also ensuring that the core values of hope, support, and empowerment would remain at the heart of everything we did. It was time to start thinking about the next generation, the future of the sanctuary, the future of this work. And as I looked at Sarah, I knew that the torch would one day be passed to her. She was the one who had started this journey, the one who had taken the pain of her past and turned it into something that would continue to change lives. As the months turned into years, Sarah and I continued to expand our reach, to help more women, and to grow the sanctuary into a beacon of hope for those in need. We hired more staff, developed more programs, and reached out to more communities. The impact we were making spread far beyond the walls of our sanctuary. And as for Sarah, she was no longer just a survivor. She had become a leader, an advocate, and a symbol of strength for women everywhere. Together, we had created something that was larger than ourselves, something that would continue to change lives long after we were gone.